Thank you. Got a bit of a multi-hand problem here because I didn't memorise my speech. I used to be able to learn these off by heart, but this is what happens when you hit 30, kids. So I might have to just speak without the mic and use the clicker in the other hand. That's all right?
Project.
Yeah. Which one is that on the clicker?
Left and right.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, hey, I'm Tom. I've come to VideoBrains once again for the third time running now to talk about something that is not about video games. I really don't know why Jake keeps falling for this, but he does. Instead, hang on, this isn't actually quite right anymore. That's more like it. But I'm not here to talk about Maya, which is currently available on Steam for $17.98. But I am here to talk about something else entirely. It's not actually these guys, though. It's not even these guys, but these guys, the actual little plastic space marines. Now, these are Space Marines from Warhammer 40,000, one of several games about armies of tiny plastic men put out by Games Workshop. Now, if you played a Games Workshop video game or you've just seen them around, you're probably wondering, why are people into this stuff? Because it just seems like really generic. You either get Grimdark Tolkien or Space Marines, which is incredibly generic. Like, I mean, they're in all games ever. It's so generic you didn't even realise that's not a Warhammer Space Marine, that's a StarCraft Space Marine. This is a Warhammer Space Marine, the difference is the skulls. And that is actually a fair point. Now, personally, I think there's kind of a little something to Warhammer, which is in this kind of 2000 AD style, very British excess, where everything is just so ramped up to a ridiculous amount that it's kind of darkly comic, which is why the basic unit in Warhammer 40,000 is an 8-foot tall religious fanatic super soldier in power armor wielding a semi-automatic rocket launcher. This one has 26 skulls visible on his armor. It's a universe so aggressively absurd and over the top that the spaceships have stained glass windows. That's how gothic it is. I couldn't actually find a picture with it where it's visible, but trust me, it's there. That's how gothic this game is. It's a game that makes Doom appear restrained and subtle. But I'm not really here to talk about that, because as weird and unique as that appeal is, I don't think that's why people play Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000 and all the other derivatives. I don't think that's why it's held this weird spell over teenage British, let's be honest, boys, because that's who it's marketed to for so long. What's done it is the plastic. Because if you've actually played one of these games, you'll rapidly realise that the game is kind of the least important part. What you'll spend most of your time doing is collecting, assembling, and painting tiny plastic men. That's why this talk isn't really about tabletop miniature games, because if I wanted to do that, I'd probably talk about the X-Wing miniature game, which is great, as opposed to the Warhammer games, which are kind of a definition of a mixed bag. But I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about playing with plastic space Barbies, because that's kind of what I've been doing all this time, is playing with dolls. Playing dress up, really. It took a while for me to admit that, and by a while I mean like 10 years, to stop using words like miniature and action figure, because it turns out when you're actually an adult, you don't have to pretend to be an adult anymore. You just are. And so you can admit, I like playing with dolls. But why these dolls specifically? I mean, once you've admitted you like playing with dolls, why not go the whole hog? Why not start collecting Barbies? Isn't Warhammer just another aggressively masculine version of that? Isn't it just another man cakes? Well, yes. Warhammer is aggressively coded masculine and pushed on boys ahead of girls. There's no getting away from that. This is a world in which Space Marines can't be women because of the law. It says pause for laughter here. At times it seems like Games Workshop think you can't be female unless you're an elf. They even managed to have these awesome ladies who are a cross between Marcus Phoenix, Neil Gaiman's Death and Notre Dame Cathedral and do basically nothing with them. But also, no, because as much as we mock man-bred, the truth is I just like a lot of stuff that is coded masculine. I like my technology black, I like my cars rugged, and I like my dolls covered in skulls. Right now I'm obsessed with building settlements in Fallout 4, which is something I could just as easily do in The Sims. But you know what? I prefer weird, ramshackle, post-apocalyptic buildings to IKEA. At least that's what I tell my mum whenever she sees my flat. After all, if we accept that you can be a feminist and like Disney princesses, then we can also accept, these are all real, there's way more than that, these are just some of my favourites. We can also accept that you can be a male feminist and like demons covered in skulls. If it feels... This is true, it's the #1 image. I didn't actually put pause for laughter here, I didn't expect that one. If it feels like I'm using the word skulls a lot, by the way, trust me, that is entirely reflective of the source material. But the other reason I particularly like these dolls is because of just how much they let you express yourself. You see, most Games Workshop models these days, I keep saying Games Workshop because they're the most popular, but there's a whole ton of smaller companies that do similar stuff. It's just, that's how most people got into it. Anyway, these days, most of them look something like this, with lots of little bits that you can stick together in different ways, and crucially, chop, change, and swap with other bits to your heart's content. I haven't really encountered anything like that with other dolls. I mean, I know there's stuff with like model trains or dollhouse furniture, but that's very niche and hard to encounter in everyday life. I mean, you can like change Barbie's clothes around, but you can't cut off her arm and replace it with a chainsaw. I mean, you can, but it's not like built into the product. Games Workshop Miniatures and all those other companies, they're kind of built on the expectation that you will customize and modify what you've bought from them. As a young kid, that's huge. It's the next step up from Lego when you're a teenager and you want to pretend that you don't like things that little kids like, before you hit 30 and you can admit that again. It lets you create these wonderful, unique things that you can actually hold in your real physical hands, and it doesn't require an absurd amount of talent to do so. It's like the Guitar Hero of sculpture. You can even do it if you're a bit crap like me. Now, thank you. This is the 4th VideoBrains talk I've done. Most of them involve plumbing the depths of my nerdy soul. The first one I did was about Dungeons and Dragons, and yet this is still the scariest thing I've ever done, is put this up on screen. Even though I've already admitted to all the nerdy things, because I don't really show these to people. Like, this is some stuff that I've built. None of it looks like anything anyone else has, because it's all, and none of it looks like the stock stuff, because it's all put together from little random bits and pieces, some of it like papered over, and little bits of extremely amateur sculpting going on to cover up the joints. It's all mine. There's no one else who has anything like these guys. And all the game ever did, really, all the actual game did was produce a context where all this was acceptable. It's kind of like how MMOs give people an excuse to socialize and play dress up, and sometimes it doesn't really matter whether you're actually playing the game or not. Sadly, it's quite hard to get to the point where you realize this is an excuse. Like, it took me many years. It wasn't until relatively recently that I admitted to myself I don't really care about playing Warhammer the game. I just want to make some cool models. That's an important part of becoming an adult. Well, I mean, not as important as learning to file your taxes properly, but close. Because that's kind of the baffling thing about Games Workshop. It's made a huge business out of sculpting and playing with dolls, while pretending that it's not actually about that. And it's about playing a strategy game. Now, sure, there's people who are into it for that, but let's be honest, most of them are now moving over to other games that are better at that, but don't offer this weird customization. There's a lesson in there for games too. A while back on the way home from VideoBrains, I jokingly pitched like Thrin, Tim and Dan that there should be an MMO that's just about showing off your outfits and exploring. You know, a massively multiplayer online walking simulator. Because for some people, that's what these games are about, and yet they're forced to jump through the weird hoops of going in raids to get the cool spiky armor. I don't know, there's not really a deep point here. There often aren't in my talks. It's more about me explaining a weird corner of gaming or gaming adjacent activities and why it appeals to me. It's about me bearing the core of my nerdy soul and saying, hey, my name is Tom. I like playing with dolls. Thank you.